Okay, well, welcome everybody to this 2022 prophecy review. I tend to, at the end of each year, look back to see, well, what has actually happened over the last 12 months with Bible in hand. And here we are. I've forgotten what the date is now. It's Monday, the 16th of January. Thank you all for zooming in. Look, the idea of this is to really give our lives a new perspective, or a different perspective, because prophecy and looking at prophecy isn't about us trying to be clever. It's basically trying to show us God's hand working in the world, which I believe then increases faith in that there is a God and that he is in control and that he does have a plan and purpose. And I think the more we have that in the center of our minds, the better it actually puts our lives into perspective. And so our minds are no longer so much focused on our jobs or families or holidays or whatever else might take up our thoughts. By watching God's hand working in the world, by seeing the nearness of Jesus Christ return to this earth, well, surely that perspective that gives us can really help us. And I think if prophecy doesn't motivate us to live differently, then it is a waste of time. But actually, God knows that it helps us. He didn't have to put into his scriptures many hundreds, if not thousands of verses, of course, that are around prophecy to really help us, especially in these last days. So let's kick things off. Let's have a look at what CBS News, what they saw as a review of 2022 from a world news perspective.
From politics to the world abroad, Russia invaded Ukraine, a U.S. drone strike in Afghanistan killed an al-Qaeda leader, and political turmoil hit Britain, with 2 prime ministers resigning. CBS 2's Ian Lee reports from London.
War engulfed Eastern Europe when Russia invaded Ukraine in February. Millions of refugees fled their homes, while the fighting killed tens of thousands on both sides, including thousands of Ukrainian civilians. The conflict also triggered an energy crisis because of the world's dependence on Russia's oil. With tensions rising in the Holy Land, 2022 proved to be one of the deadliest years for Palestinians in the West Bank. Around 150 Palestinians were killed, along with more than 24 Israelis. An Israeli soldier killed American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, prompting the FBI to open an investigation. In Iran, the death of a young woman in custody for breaking the country's dress code led to a deadly government crackdown on protesters. Queen Elizabeth celebrated 70 years on the British throne in June and died 3 months later. The monarch's funeral drew foreign leaders from around the world. Political turmoil in the UK led to a string of new prime ministers, which ushered in Britain's first leader of color, Rishi Sunak. Sunak joined President Biden and other world leaders in Egypt for the COP27 climate conference in November, where countries agreed to create a fund to support nations most vulnerable to climate disasters. And Mother Nature put on quite a show in 2022. The most powerful volcano in 140 years erupted off the coast of Tonga, while the land of fire and ice drew thousands of tourists as lava gushed from one of Iceland's 32 volcanoes. Ian Lee, CBS News.
Well, look, there we are. That's how CBS News described everything. And I think, to be perfectly honest, with Bible in hand, we would have picked up most of those things ourselves as significant events with Bible in hand. And I'm pretty certain that all of us would have put at the top of that list the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is the first war in Europe for 70 years between 2 nations. And it really has shaken not only Europe, but the whole world, I'm sure we would agree. And we're going to look at that in some detail. I think the other significant thing that happened in 2022, of course, was the death of Queen Elizabeth II. She had been on the throne for exactly 70 years. We're actually not going to look at that significant event in tonight's talk, mainly because I think to do it justice, you've got to throw a good hour at this to really understand how she fits in. But suffice to say, it's all there in Isaiah chapter 23, and there's lots of really good talks on this. In fact, what I might do, if I get this uploaded onto YouTube, is put some links below to some really good talks about the significance of the death of Queen Elizabeth II. We also saw in Iran many protests. We can see that the deal in Iran is potentially coming to an end, and we will cover some of that this evening. At the very end of the year, there's been lots of political turmoil in Israel in recent years, but at the end of 2022, Benjamin Netanyahu was sworn in again as Prime Minister. I think he's been Prime Minister for at least 15 years and then was out during the majority of last year, but has come back in again with this so-called very hardline government. We'll consider that as well briefly. And of course, there's all the extreme weather that CBS News picked on, and we've seen record heat waves around the world, especially in Europe as well, and in the UK. We saw the hottest year ever in the UK last year. So lots and lots of things going on. What I wanted to do just before we started looking at the events that happened last year is just to remind you really as to what I think are the three stages of the final judgment of the world. And I think they are distinct stages, but sort of interlinked stages. And I call them stage 1, 2, 3. And the first stage I call the inner ring war. So this is a stage that perhaps we haven't looked at that much as a community, but personally, I see it there. And now I've seen it, I sort of can't unsee it, if you take my meaning. So in Psalm 83, in Isaiah 17, in Zechariah 12, and many other places as well, there is description of an initial inner ring war around Israel. And this inner ring war involves immediate neighbors, as Zechariah 12 calls it, or surrounding peoples. These are people that are very close geographically to Israel, and they fight against Israel. Ezekiel calls them the pricking briars, and these pricking briars are all removed. Israel wins this inner ring war that comes first. And after that, there's a sort of a great void that is left in the Middle East, especially in Syria, because Syria is involved in this initial inner ring war, as well as parts of Lebanon, as well as parts of Jordan. There's the Palestinians involved, there's Hamas, there's Hezbollah, there's Islamic Jihad. All these people that are calling for the end of Israel, they're all involved. But Damascus is destroyed in this initial inner ring war. Into the void that's left, that is when stage 2 happens. So stage 2, and we've looked a lot at this, and we'll be looking at this again this evening, is looking at the Russian invasion of Israel. And this is where Russia, along with other nations as well, pour into the Middle East, into Israel, and beyond into Egypt. And this is all mentioned in Ezekiel 38, in Daniel chapter 11, and in Zechariah chapter 14. So this is stage 2. And all these nations come to a cataclysmic end on the mountains of Jerusalem. But then there is still a stage 3 to come. And stage 3 happens after Jesus has been sort of established in Israel and in Jerusalem with the saints. And this is where a resurrected Holy Roman Empire, based, of course, in Europe itself, come and physically attack the Lord Jesus Christ and the saints who are established in Israel in Jerusalem at the time that they come down. And this is all detailed in Revelation 17, which of course comes after Revelation 16, which predominantly is dealing with stage 2. So stage 3 is in the following chapter, this resurrected Holy Roman Empire. So stage 1 is all about sorting out Israel's relatives. Many of those people that surround Israel are related to Israel to some extent, though not all of them. Stage 2 is about spoil. This is Russia wanting to invade Israel because of its riches. And stage 3 is nothing to do with them being related to Israel, nothing to do with Israel's riches. It's all to do with Israel's religion. And when all those three things have been sorted out, then we reach a point where the kingdom can fully get underway and is established as a worldwide kingdom with Jesus ruling on earth, with those who are with him, who are called and chosen and faithful. Now, what I want to do tonight is to actually show you that Ukraine itself is impacting on all three stages. And that's really what we want to look at this evening. And what we're probably going to focus mainly on are the events that have been happening in between Russia and Ukraine with this conflict. Now, I guess some might say, well, yeah, fine, Andy, you're talking here about, Russia and the invasion of Ukraine, but what you're doing is retrofitting events into prophecy to try and make them fit, because whoever talked about Russia invading Ukraine before it happened? Like nobody. Well, there's two things I wanted to say on that. Partly that's true. We do, we're not necessarily using the Bible to try and predict every small event that, that happens, because prophecy is written, and when the events unfold and the detail happens, well, yes, definitely then you can actually see what the Bible was talking about. The closer you get to a picture, the more detail you can see. However, that isn't entirely true, because I had a look back to see back in the weekly World Watch that I've been doing for around about 20 years now. I had a look back to see, well, when did I first pick up on Ukraine being significant and perhaps there being a war there? So all the way back in 2008, which is roughly 15 years ago now, I think this is probably the first time 15 years ago when I sort of picked on Ukraine as a potential prophetical situation that we should be looking for. So just to remind you, I mean, I do the weekly World Watch, and this is a screenshot of the weekly World Watch. They're all up there online, so people can download them, any previous ones. And there's the headline there in orange that's taken straight out of the newspaper or the news organization's online website. The information in black is word for word what they wrote in their report, and the information that's there in blue is my comments on why this is interesting. And of course, I put a Bible quote down the bottom to link it all together. So just reading the bit in blue down the bottom. So this is taken 15 years ago. I've put the tensions between Russia and its southern neighbours remain very high, because this is all to do with some conflict going on between Russia and Georgia at the time. We know of the situation in Georgia because of the recent conflict there. Now look what I've put here. Ukraine might be next on Russia's list to stir up trouble. Why? Well, Ukraine gained independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and is now seeking closer integration with Western Europe. Russia obviously wants to stop this. What is perhaps interesting about Ukraine is that it covers some of the territory of ancient Magog, as does Georgia. We know that Gog is of the land of Magog from Ezekiel 38, verse 2. The Magogites were, according to Josephus, the same people as the Scythians. The Scythians, according to Herodotus, lived around the Black Sea up to the river Danube. Therefore, ancient Magog includes some of Russia and Ukraine. Therefore, we watch Russia as it eyes part of the ancient territory of Magog. And you can see there, I've put where the river Danube reaches or comes to, and it comes to the south portion there of Ukraine. So that was back in 2008. In 2014, in the Weekly World Watch, there was this headline as unrest erupts across west of Ukraine. And again, look what I've written here. We are very interested in Ukraine. Why? Because we're told in Ezekiel 38 that Gog is of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Magog, according to ancient historian Josephus, was where the Scythians lived. Maps show that the Scythians lived in southern Russia and Ukraine. See map above. Instead of Scythia, read Magog. You can see that Scythia covered mainly southern Russia, but also extended to cover much of Ukraine. The violence in Ukraine is due to half the country wanting to come under Russian influence and half wanting to come under Europe's influence. Russia is winning this tug of war by doing gas deals and putting massive pressure on Ukraine government. Russia sees Ukraine as its satellite nation. In fact, its main military port on the Black Sea is actually in the Ukraine at Sevastopol. We know Russia will come with many ships. They're based in Magog. And then what I did in the World Watch was expanded that map so people could see where the area of Magog, which Josephus says is the same as Scythia, where it actually was. And as you can see there, I've superimposed at the time the map of modern-day Ukraine. And you can see there that Scythia covers the eastern southern part of modern-day Ukraine. And this is what I'd latched onto. And I've put that down the bottom. Look, on the left, down in blue, look down the bottom there. It says on the left, we have superimposed modern Ukraine. You will notice that the eastern half of Ukraine was part of ancient Scythia, Magog. So this is, you know, when did I say it was? 2014. So this is 9 years ago that I'm saying this. In 2018, I put Ukraine bans Russian men aged 16 to 60 from entry. And again, I'm saying the same thing here. Just reading some of the blue at the bottom. The Bible says that Gog, Russian leader, is of the land of Magog. Some believe Magog to be Germany, but this doesn't add up. The Russian ruler cannot be of the land of Germany. Even if Russia defeated Germany in war, you would still not say the Russian leader is of the land of Germany. He is of the land of Russia. Magog was actually, at the time Ezekiel wrote, southern Russia north of the Black Sea, but some of Magog did cover part of eastern Ukraine. It is likely then that this part will come back under Russian control. War may be coming here. So this is like 4 and a bit years ago. I'm saying that the eastern part of Ukraine, it's likely is going to come back under Russian control. War is coming. And here is a map of the current situation, of course. So on the left there are the areas that Russia has annexed into itself because of those false referendums that it held there last year. And so, as you can see, this lines up very, very accurately. I'm not saying it's to the square mile, but you can see it's very, very similar to the territory that I was pointing out that Scythia, ancient Magog, controlled. So to me, this is absolutely incredible that we were onto this, we could see it coming, and now it's happening before our very eyes.
It's been more than 3 months since Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, leveling parts of the country and disrupting the post-war world order in the process.
It's the most shocking moment for global security since the end of the Cold War.
From the risk to the global economy, to the looming nuclear threat, we ask our experts how the conflict has already changed the world and how its effects will be felt for years to come.
The rest of our lives are quite likely to be shaped by the consequences of this war.
Right, so look, there's the question. The war in Ukraine, how has the world changed? And really, that's the focus now of this evening. We want to look in some detail at the impact of this war. So I've put on the screen here the top 10 impacts from my perspective of this Ukraine war. So here they are. Now, you might have, you might put up very different things, I don't know, but here are my top 10 things. And I've put there the little symbol in the top right-hand corner, the Christadelphian symbol of the Bible in hand, because this is the top 10 impacts of the Ukraine war with Bible in hand, with our understanding of prophecy. The first thing I've put there is that Putin is trapped and it's making him more dangerous. Secondly, it's brought back fears of nuclear war. Escalated military aid to Ukraine by America and Britain. It's isolated Russia's economy. It's driven Israel and Egypt together, on a gas deal with regards to the EU. It's driven Russia and Iran together. It's driven Russia and Israel apart. It's torn apart the Iranian nuclear deal. It's added to fears of famine around the world. And it's increased worldwide military spending, especially in regards to Germany. So let's have a look through some of these things. And we're going to start at the top of the list, which is that Putin is in this sort of trapped situation in Ukraine. Things are not going according to plan, and it's making him more dangerous. So with Bible in hand, I turn to Daniel chapter 8, and I've done a whole talk on this called The Time of the End. And what it basically does is shows you that in Daniel chapter 8, it is specifically talking about two characters, an ancient king of the north and a latter day end times king of the north. And the original king of the north, mentioned in the earlier verses, is a man called Antiochus Epiphanes. And Antiochus Epiphanes was a terrible person who ended up banning the religion of the Jews, killing thousands upon thousands of Jews. And there's a whole big story about him, which we haven't got time to look into. However, at the time of the end, we're told that there's a latter day Antiochus Epiphanes who ruled north of Israel originally. And here is a description of him in Daniel chapter 8, verse 23. We're told that he's a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, and he's going to arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. And look what he does. He causes astounding devastation and succeeds in whatever he does. He destroys those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper. He will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Princes, that's Jesus. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. So this is a latter-day Antiochus Epiphanes. And the first thing I just want you to see there is that whoever this person is, he causes astounding devastation. Another modern version says shocking destruction. And it's almost as if, I don't know if you'd agree with me on this, but it's almost as if that the astounding devastation, the shocking destruction, is the thing that helps him to succeed, because the two things are there in the same sentence. Astounding devastation, he succeeds in whatever he does. And surely, you know, we're seeing some level of shocking devastation and destruction going on in Ukraine as we speak. I just want to show you something interesting. Here is ancient Antiochus Epiphanes. That's what he looked like. That's a photograph of an ancient bust of Antiochus Epiphanes. And here we've got who I believe is the latter-day Antiochus Epiphanes, a latter-day king of the north. And of course, at the moment, it's Vladimir Putin. And amazingly, the two people look very, very similar. It's almost as if God is saying, look, I'll even make the two people look similar. Now, there is a Rabbi Paul Steinberg, who's written a lot about the ancient Antiochus Epiphanes. And in this article, you can read it online if you look it up. As I say, it's Rabbi Paul Steinberg. And he's written quite a lot about this, this man. And his book is called Antiochus the Madman. And that is because originally they saw Antiochus as being completely mad because of the crazy things that he did, the invasions, the slaughter, the destruction. And they didn't call him Antiochus Epiphanes. They changed his name to be called Antiochus Epimanes, which in that language means Antiochus the madman. And that is quite interesting when you actually look at what people are saying about Putin.
The stakes in Ukraine could not be higher, with the Russian military making direct attacks on civilian targets like apartment buildings. And given Vladimir Putin's apparent willingness to escalate, Russian experts are now speculating about his mental state.
Has Putin gone crazy? Is he losing his grip on his sanity?
Evaluating Vladimir Putin's state of mind a top priority now.
The Russian leader could be completely off his rocker.
Some people say he has cancer, and some people say he has brain fog from COVID.
Even in Russia, citizens are buzzing. The Russian people may be starting to think Putin is insane, goes this headline.
I tell you, I think this guy's nutter.
You think he's just kind of losing it?
Yes, I do.
Putin's mental state is getting late-night laughs.
A growing number of U.S. officials and their allies.
Yeah, well, we'll leave the laughs on one side. So look, here is the article by Rabbi Paul Steinberg in a bit more detail. So there you are, look, it talks about Antiochus Epiphanes there being the madman. But here's the other amazing thing, and this is what I wanted to pick up on. He writes about the fact that the Romans were advancing eastward. They were expanding their empire. And as the Romans were expanding their empire, and by the way, I should tell you, and it says there, all of these events are happening a couple of hundred years before Jesus was born. So this is the ancient Antiochus, this is the ancient king of the north, Antiochus Epiphanes. And it says there that the Romans were advancing eastward and expanding their empire. If Antiochus could conquer and annex Egypt, his kingdom size and power would be greatly increased. So imagine the Roman Empire is sort of beginning to grow. They're advancing eastward. Antiochus doesn't like this advancing eastward of the Roman Empire. So he starts to push back and decides to annex Egypt. He isn't able to annex Egypt. Rome warns Antiochus not to expand his kingdom, and Antiochus was not powerful enough to defy the mighty Roman Empire. And isn't it amazing how this is exactly what has been happening in a different land, yes, but very, very similar events. You've got the EU that has been expanding forever eastwards, and NATO has been expanding forever eastwards. That has wound up Putin. He has tried to annex land, and yet he is not powerful enough to defy the might of the army that he is up against. What then happens, though, and this is the really interesting point, is that Antiochus, unable to completely stop the Roman advance, so furious was he that he returns to Jerusalem and slaughters thousands of Jewish people and outlaws Judaism. And this is why God is so interested in this person and has written so much about him, because of the impact that he had on God's own people the Jews.
Dangerous and reckless. That's how the CIA director described Russia's President Vladimir Putin when he is cornered. This as the Russian leader warned that he might fire nuclear weapons at the West while thousands of his people flee Russia's military draft and as Ukraine makes gains in the East.
He's got to be concerned, and not just about what's happening on the battlefield in Ukraine, what's happening at home, and what's happening internationally. You know, he stood next to Xi Jinping last February, just before the war started, and they proclaimed a friendship without limits. Well, it turns out that that friendship has some limits, too. I mean, the Chinese have controlled their enthusiasm for Russia's conduct of this war. They haven't provided the kind of military support that Putin had been looking for as well. So he's got to be troubled by what he sees, but he's also stubbornly confident in his own judgments. He believes he's tougher than anybody else.
You make it sound like he's even more dangerous.
Putin cornered, Putin who feels his back against the wall, can be quite dangerous and reckless.
So look, Putin cornered is Putin dangerous. This isn't Putin going to stand down or back down. What he does is increases the terror. What he does is increases the destruction. So we're going to look at a few World Watch slides from last year. So this is a headline from the Times. At his most dangerous and with a political solution now impossible, we're entering final stage Putin. Wounded Putin will be more dangerous than ever. That was in September in the Times. Putin said last year that Russia would use nuclear weapons if its sovereignty was threatened. Putin escalates Ukraine war and issues nuclear threat to the West. That was in Reuters again in September. Look what he says there in that first line. This is not a bluff, he said, in relation to him using nuclear weapons. And of course, what did the Bible say? He's going to cause a shocking amount of destruction. There's nothing more shocking, more terrifying than the use of nuclear weapons. So it looks as if Putin, according to the scriptures, is only going to escalate and just create even more conflict and more destruction for him to win what he wants to win, which of course is now that one segment of the eastern part of the country. He's not even trying to take over the whole of Ukraine. His actual declared objectives now are to take over that Donbass region. So absolutely, I think that point one, Putin trap making more dangerous, we can see fits all the way back into exactly what was going on in Daniel chapter 8 originally, and now it's happening again with this latter-day Putin, king of the north. The second thing is, of course, it's all of this has brought back fears of nuclear war. In Luke chapter 21, Jesus says, talking about what the world will be like before he comes back, it says, on earth nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world. And surely all this sudden talk of nuclear war, which we haven't had for decades upon decades, is causing people to really fear what really is happening.
Thank you so much for doing this, sir. Appreciate it.
Happy to.
So for people at home who don't know, this is the map room. During World War II, this is where it was basically the situation room for FDR. He would look at sensitive information. And now we're at a period where there's another high-stakes war in Europe. You recently said that this is the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis that there's a legitimate possibility of someone using a nuclear weapon, which could lead to Armageddon. That's the word you used. How realistic is it, do you think, that Putin would use a tactical nuclear weapon?
Well, I don't think he will, but I think it's irresponsible for him to talk about it. The idea that a world leader of one of the largest nuclear powers in the world says he may use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, and the whole point I was making was it could lead to just a horrible outcome. And not because anybody intends to turn it into a world war or anything, but it just, once you use a nuclear weapon, the mistakes that can be made, the miscalculations, who knows what would happen.
What is the
So clearly Biden doesn't think he will. I think it's more like he hopes he won't. With Bible in hand, we can't say categorically if he will, but we do know with Bible in hand, he is causing and will cause this shocking destruction. So anyway, here we are in the Times Weekly World Watch slide. Desperate Vladimir Putin may use tactical nuclear weapons. Given the potential desperation of Vladimir Putin and the Russian leadership, given the setbacks that they've faced so far militarily, none of us can take lightly the threat posed by potential resort to tactical nuclear weapons or low yield nuclear weapons, so says the CIA chief. So we've seen fears increase around the world. The other key point, I think, that comes out of the Ukraine war is this one. And to me, this one is massive. This one is about the massive military aid that Ukraine has received, especially by America and Britain. And we say, yes, we've seen all of this on the news, but why is this? What's this got to do with Bible prophecy? How is that fulfilling it? Well, we've been looking for this for a long time in the Weekly World Watch, and there are literally hundreds, if not, well, there's definitely hundreds of slides in relation to this verse and the fact that we've been looking for this very thing to happen, and we believe it's definitely underway. So in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, it talks, well, it says this, it says, at the time of the end, shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north will come against him. That's the king of the south, like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and many ships. But the point is, at the start of that verse, it says at the time of the end. So clearly this is something that's happening at the very, very end. Some power called the king of the south is pushing at an individual person, pushing at him. And the verses that describe who the person is, who the him are the verses 36 to 39 of Daniel chapter 11. And that is a description of Gog himself, the Russian ruler. So Daniel chapter 11, verses 36 to 39 is a description of Gog himself, the Russian ruler, the king of the north, the latter-day Antiochus Epiphanes. It's exactly the same person that we've already been talking about in Daniel chapter 8. And what you have to do to sort of understand what's going on in Daniel chapter 11 is compare it to to Ezekiel 38. And when you put these two passages together, so there's Daniel chapter 11 on the right, and there's Ezekiel 38 on the left, and you can see, because I've color-coded it, it's the same event. Same ideas, same words, same Hebrew words are being used in these two passages. It's the same event. And Daniel 11 is verse 36 to 39, as I've just said, is a description of a king, a ruler who does certain things. And at the time of the end, the king of the south pushes at him. And over in Ezekiel 38, we've got the description of Gog of the land of Magog. And both of these characters come down and invade Israel. And what I'm suggesting to you is that Gog, who is spoken of here, and we're given where he lives, he's of the land of Magog, is the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. All of that is territory of Russia. What we've got in Daniel 11 isn't a description of where he lives. It's a description of who he is, what he is like. And you can see how these two passages line up. So the question then is, if we know that it's the Russian ruler who is the person who is being pushed, so the king of the south pushes at Gog, what is that talking about? Well, the word push is the Hebrew word to gore. It's literally a horned animal who sort of attacks you with his horn, and it's a goring. So fine. So now we've got the Russian ruler is being gored. He's being, I would in my language, I would say this is a military provocation. It's not to the death. A bull that gores you rarely kills you. It will injure you, but not kill you. And I think that's why that word is being used. But then the question is, well, who's the king of the south? And I believe, again, looking at Ezekiel 38, that the king of the south, we're told there's an opposing force to Russia. And the opposing force to Russia is Sheba, Dedan, Tarshish, and the young lions. And that is a description of Saudi Arabia, Britain, that's Tarshish, and America and Canada and other English-speaking nations that are an offspring of Britain, who are the young lions. So if I'm going to put the verse that we've just been looking at on the screen, so the king of the south will push at him, the Russian ruler Gog, this is what it looks like in pictorial form. So there's Gog, and there is the push, there is the military provocation, and it's being done by the king of the south. And the head of the king of the south, the most powerful of the king of the south, out of Saudi Arabia, Britain, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so on, it's surely America, with Britain in second position. And what we're being told is that there's this military provocation, and this is underway, we believe, right now. And it's verse 40 of Daniel 11 is being fulfilled.
For the Russian military in Ukraine, it's become a fearsome adversary.
Well, these are the next generation light anti-tank weapon, or NLAW as they're known. They're a shoulder-mounted portable fire and forget missile with a range of up to 800 meters. Now, the UK has supplied 2,000 of these to the Ukrainian forces, and it's these that are proving so effective against Russian armor.
So that's how it began, UK supplying these small rocket launchers, and now it looks more like this.
Tipping the balance on the battlefield in Ukraine's favour.
These British weapons are vital for Ukraine, giving troops the ability to hit valuable Russian targets at a distance with precision.
The Biden administration sending a new $625 million military package to Ukraine. It includes 16 howitzers and 4 high-mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS. According to the Associated Press, this is the first time the U.S. has sent more HIMARS to Ukraine since July. The weapons have been crucial to Ukrainian forces as their blitz continues to gain momentum. Today, Ukrainian troops press deeper into Russian-controlled territories on the southern and eastern fronts. Russian soldiers struggling to hang on to 4 regions that Putin illegally annexed last week.
So let's have a look at a few weekly World Watch slides from last year. Now look at the phrases, look at the words that are being used here. This is the headline on the BBC, April the 28th last year. Push Russia out of whole of Ukraine, says Truss. Now this wasn't Truss as Prime Minister, this was Truss as the Foreign Secretary of the UK at the time. And she uses this phrase to push Russia out of Ukraine. It's exactly the same words that are being used in Daniel 11 verse 40. Same words in relation to America, US to push for Ukraine win, and it raises the stakes for Russia. That was in The Economist in April last year. Ukrainian troops shell Russians with American howitzers. That was in The Times in May. Johnson, this is Boris Johnson, who is the Prime Minister at the time of Britain. He urges missiles for Ukraine to hit crocodile Putin. You notice how personal this is, calling him a crocodile. Even that actually is significant from a scriptural point of view. US and UK send long-range rockets to target Putin's war machine. That's in June 2022. UK missiles helped to chase Russian Navy fleet from the Black Sea coast. And again, look at the word push coming out here. Ukraine has pushed the Russian naval fleet away from the Black Sea coast with help of anti-ship missiles supplied by, well, Britain. It's Britain that's helping Ukraine do the push. It's the military provocation. UK Prime Minister Truss, so now she's into Prime Minister at this point in September 2022, UK Prime Minister Truss pledges escalated offensive against Russia. British rocket launchers turning the tide against Russia. That was Sky News in October. US rushes to send new systems in response to Russian missiles. That was also in October. I mean, America has sent billions and billions of dollars of aid over to Ukraine. I think it's something in the region of 50 billion, of which about half is military equipment. It's an astonishing amount of military aid that America has given. Pentagon gives Ukraine green light for drone strikes inside Russia. And so we see attacks recently at the back end of 2022 with Russian airfields hundreds of miles inside Russia being blown up because Ukraine has this green light. This was just about a week ago. So what was the date today? It's Monday the 16th today of January 2023. And here we've got about a week ago, Ukraine News Live, Putin ally says Russia at war with UK and US, with Britain and America, not Kyiv, not Ukraine. So you see, this is exactly how Putin and the regime see it. This is a war against the UK and the US, which is exactly what the King of the South is predominantly made up of. And this was Saturday, the 14th of Jan, so just literally a couple of days ago. Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, confirms that the UK will send tanks to Ukraine to push Russian troops back. He's again used the identical word from Daniel 11, verse 40. At the time of the end, the King of the South will push at him, the Russian ruler. It really is amazing. So number 4 on the list is of the top 10 impacts of the Ukraine war is Russia's economy becoming isolated. And we might say, well, where on earth does it talk about that in the Bible? Well, what it does say in the Bible is in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 10, it talks about Gog, the Russian ruler, currently Vladimir Putin, thinking an evil thought. And he thinks to himself that he's going to go to Israel to take a spoil and to take a prey. So he wants something that Israel has got. He wants wealth. He wants some of the, in other verses in Ezekiel 38, it talks about the fact that Israel's got goods and many, many things. And he wants these things. Now, what is interesting about that, because that doesn't say that Russia and the economy is in a difficult position, but it does say he wants these goods. But what is quite amazing about that is Brother John Thomas, the first Christadelphian, all the way back in 1849, when he read Ezekiel 38, it led him to believe that the Russian economy would be on its knees because he's so interested in trying to take a spoil from Israel. And these are his words. Let the Russian treasury be as empty as it is said to be, and its expenditure exceed its revenue by double the alleged deficit. It will only operate as a pressure from within, causing her autocrat, that's talking about Gog, the Russian ruler, to enter into the countries and to overflow and pass over and to enrich himself with the spoil of those he is destined to subdue. So he basically wrote 150 or so years ago, Russia is going to be bankrupt. The treasury is going to be empty. It's not going to have enough resources, and therefore he will be pressured to go and take a spoil from Israel.
I'm announcing the first tranche of sanctions.
These sanctions are a major step.
And we hold further sanctions at readiness to be deployed.
This is about as close to global economic war as we've ever come.
Compared to all historical campaigns, this is taking sanctions to the limit.
The economy is tanking. The ruble has fallen through the floor. Inflation is soaring. Interest rates are up.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine triggered a global economic response without precedent in terms.
So we know what's been going on. These sanctions are crippling the economy of Fortress Russia. So says the Daily Telegraph back in March 2022. Run on banks and empty shelves as sanctions bite in Russia. That was again back in March 2022. Sanctions could cost Russian economy a decade of growth. That was May last year in the Times. Russian economy crashes 15% as sanctions and arms trade sort of begins to impact. That was in June in the Telegraph. Russia's economy buckles as Western sanctions start to bite. That was in the Times in June last year. Humiliation for Putin as Russia defaults on foreign debts. Putin is heading for economic oblivion. That was in August in the Times last year. Russia's cash reserves run dry as West shuns Putin's energy. So look, there was John Thomas all those years ago saying Russia is going to be on its knees, bankrupt. And that's exactly now what we're seeing happen. It's acting as a pressure for Russia to come and ultimately invade Israel. We'll look at that in just a minute. One of the things that the Ukraine war has done is driven Israel and Egypt together on a gas deal with the EU. This is hugely significant, and we can definitely see this, I believe, in prophecy. So in Daniel chapter 11, verse 41, so this is clearly the following verse from the verse we've been considering. So this is after the king of the south has pushed at Gog. It then says he will enter into the glorious land. So he comes down and invades Israel. That's the glorious land there is reference to Israel. So Gog is so wound up by this push that he comes down into the glorious land. And when he comes down, it says in verse 42 that he stretches forth his hand upon the countries, and notice that the land of Egypt also does not escape, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over the precious things of Egypt. So not only does Russia come down and invade Israel, but it also continues into Egypt and takes over treasures of Egypt. So clearly, Israel and Egypt are linked together somehow in Russia's mind, in Putin's mind. Have a look at this.
Amid a raging war between Russia and Ukraine, the European Union is now turning towards Israel for its natural gas supply needs, as the bloc claims that it has been blackmailed by Moscow for its gas supplies after siding with Kyiv. The European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen is in Jerusalem to strengthen Union's energy cooperation with Israel, as Russia has cut down energy supplies to several European nations amid heavy sanctions imposed by the EU to curb Moscow's Ukrainian invasion. The bloc has been looking for alternative suppliers to reduce its dependence on Russia, which in turn would help them in imposing stricter sanctions on Moscow.
The European Union was the biggest, most important client from the supplier Russia, oil, gas and coal. But with the beginning of this war and the attempt of Russia to blackmail us through energy by deliberately cutting the energy supplies, we decided to cut off and to get rid of the dependency of Russian fossil fuels and to move away from Russia and diversify to trustworthy suppliers. So it is for us very important, and I'm very grateful that we are now discussing this fascinating project that you are willing to increase the deliveries of gas to the European Union via Egypt. And tomorrow we will already take a very important step with the signing of a trilateral memorandum of understanding between Israel, the European Union and Egypt.
Russia has already cut.
Now that is just amazing, isn't it? So basically we're seeing the EU doing a deal with Israel and with Egypt over gas. Now, what is Putin going to make of that? Not very much. So all the way back, just after the war began, back in February the 28th, 2022, there was this headline, "Can Israel become Europe's gas supplier?" Because, of course, it wasn't very long ago. I can't remember the exact date now, but probably might have been about a decade ago, something like that, that Israel discovered gas off its coast and has developed gas. In fact, it was one of the largest gas finds. It's the Leviathan gas fields off Israel, one of the world's largest gas finds in recent years. And it's now sending the gas into Egypt to liquefy it, to then send it over to Europe on this new deal. Israel ready to export gas to Europe via Egypt in September. That was in the Jerusalem Post in April last year. Israel negotiating gas exports to Europe via Egypt. That's a similar headline. That was in May. EU signs gas agreement with Egypt and Israel to reduce dependency on Russian fuel. You see, the point is, what's happening clearly is that with Israel and Egypt supplying gas into Europe is effectively weakening Russia's own suppliers, because what it actually does, of course, is strengthens Europe's hand. And it actually enables Europe to wean themselves off Russian gas. It enables them to actually increase sanctions. It enables them to do more in the war in Ukraine. So Israel is diametrically opposed now to Russia over this. And Russia will see it in that way and feel in a way that Israel is stealing its own cash and its own income by doing this deal. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that there's two things really going on here. Russia is being pulled by God, we're told in Ezekiel. God, it says, puts hooks in Russia's jaws and pulls them down, and the pull is the spoil. And we can now see what the spoil is. It's this gas. It's what Russia is dependent on itself, really, for its own income. And it's the gas that it sees as its spoil. So there's a pull. But the other thing that we've also noted in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, there is also a push. And the push is from the EU pushing eastwards, and then America and Britain arming and militarily provoking Russia, arming Ukraine and provoking Russia. So there's a pull by God and there's a push by the America and Britain, and both those events are enough to get Russia one day to descend into Israel. EU envoy says Israel can replace Russian gas supply. That was in June 2022. Israel to become major energy exporter to Europe. That was in October in Israel's national news. So this is hugely significant, and the Ukraine war has brought this about. What it's also brought about is driving Russia and Iran together. Now, this is clearly there for everyone to see. It's there in Ezekiel 38, because after the list of the territories that Russia occupies, that is Magog, Meshech, and Tubal, it then gives you a list of nations that are supporting Russia's invasion of Israel. And the very first nation on the list supporting Russia is Persia. We, of course, know it as Iran. And in verse 7 of Ezekiel 38, it says, to start with, it says, look, be prepared, get yourself ready, for this conflict. And it says at the end that Russia is going to be a guard to them. In other words, Russia, Gog, the Russian ruler, is going to act as a guard for Iran, who's the top of the list there. And the word guard means to protect, a bit like the guards outside Buckingham Palace now protect the king. They did protect the Queen. Now we've got Gog protecting Iran.
To some new reporting now that's first to NBC News, and it has some major global consequences. Our Pentagon and White House team reporting today that Russia is giving an unprecedented level of military and technical support to Iran, according to senior Biden administration officials who say the support from Moscow is in exchange for weapons to use in their war with Ukraine. So what does that look like, right? Like, let's get to specifics here. For one, Iran might be getting things like helicopters and air defense systems, while the Kremlin gets Iranian-made drones, which have been used to devastating effect on the Ukrainian battlefield. According to White House officials, there's even the possibility of the two countries establishing a joint production line for drones in Russia. Joining us now is...
So there we are. I think that says it all. Let's just have a look at a few of the slides in the World Watch. Russia and Iran are holding energy talks. So Russia has been turning to Iran, the pariah state, the terrorist state. But where else is Putin going to go? Putin plots an unholy alliance with Iran and Turkey. Turkey is also mentioned in Ezekiel 38 as Togarmah. So now we've also got Putin forming this relationship, this unholy alliance with two of the nations that are specifically mentioned in Ezekiel 38. Iranian kamikaze drones strike the center of Kyiv. And we've all seen these horrendous pictures of these giant drones that Russia has bought in from Iran. They're kamikaze because they just basically destroy themselves on impact and blow up whatever it is that they're flying into. They're frightening things, and Russia has been relying on Iran's drones that they've got because Russia doesn't possess these things. Growing Russia-Iran ties pose new dangers. That was on the BBC in October last year. Russia's predicament in Ukraine has prompted Moscow to turn to Tehran for stocks of precision-guided weapons. The delicate balance of forces in Syria could be altered with significant consequences for Israel and in turn for its relationship with Moscow. So we'll look at that in just a second. Russia and Iran moving towards full defense partnership. So what we've said is that with Bible in hand, Russia would be acting as a protector of Iran. What we're actually seeing now is Iran helping Russia, and Russia in turn is saying, okay, we're going to do more and more for you. You've helped us, we are going to help you and do this defense partnership. What the Ukraine war has also done, of course, is driven Russia and Israel apart. You see, Russia doesn't invade a friend. Russia invades an enemy. And so we're expecting Russia to be anti-Semitic to some extent. We're expecting Russia to be anti-Israel, to be against Israel. Yes, they're coming to take a spoil, but you don't go and take a spoil from your best friend. We're expecting Russia and Israel to be driven apart. In fact, of course, in Daniel chapter 8, that's exactly what we're being told, because the original Antiochus Epiphanes, the original king of the north, took out all his fury on the fact that he couldn't annex the land of Egypt by attacking and killing thousands of Jews. And what's going to happen again is this will play again through in our modern day history when Putin himself, unable to take the whole of Ukraine, maybe just annexes some of it, finally comes down and invades Israel and destroys those who are mighty and the holy people, which is almost certainly some reference to the Jews living in Israel.
More than 50,000 Russian and Ukrainian Jews have moved to Israel since the outbreak of war in Ukraine in late February. Many are anxious to leave Russia because of growing anti-Semitism, the economic crisis, and their worry that the repressive policies of the Soviet Union are coming back, says Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt, former chief rabbi of Moscow, who was forced into exile.
Reason number one is the fear of the closing of the Iron Curtain, meaning that one day in the near future, it will be impossible already to leave Russia. This fear exists by many members of the Russian Jewish community.
The wave of immigration is handled by the Jewish Agency, a quasi-governmental body that helps Jews from around the world move to Israel. But Russia recently threatened to close down the Jewish Agency's operations in Moscow and bring the organization to court, claiming that it violates Russian law by gathering information about Russian citizens. Russian pressure to close the office has more to do with politics than anything else, according to Natan Sharansky, former Soviet dissident and former...
So many Jews are fleeing Russia, thousands of them back to Israel, because they're scared of what they see is beginning to happen in Russia. Anti-Semitism increasing. This was a headline in Haaretz. This is an Israeli news organization. 10 plagues facing Israel if Russia invades Ukraine. And of course, a few weeks after this headline, that's exactly what did happen. Russia takes issue with Israel's sovereignty over Golan Heights and Jerusalem. That was in the Jerusalem Post, just about the time of the invasion, February the 24th last year. Russia's next target for intimidation could be Israel. And as it says there below, as Russia slides into a pariah status in the international arena, it will want to upgrade its ties with its closest allies in the region, Syria and Iran. On the military front, signs of Russia's new regional posture are already visible. And so way before Iran was really supporting Russia in the Ukraine war, this article said that's almost entirely what's certainly going to happen, and that has happened. And this now means Russia is backing Israel's main enemies, Syria and Iran, which of course it has been doing for many years. It's just bringing them even closer together. The decline in Israel-Russia ties. So yeah, what does it say here? On Monday, Russia's foreign ministry summoned Israeli ambassador in Moscow to protest Israel's anti-Russian attack. In May last year, Russia accuses Israel of supporting Kyiv neo-Nazis. This caused headline news around the world because Sergei Lavrov came out with his statement about Israel supporting a neo-Nazi regime. And you can imagine this did not go down well at all. In fact, Israel's foreign minister at the time said this was unforgivable and outrageous statement, as well as a terrible historical error. So we can see the tension building up between Russia and Israel. Russia sends a message with first missile attack on Israel jets in Syrian war. Expert says that was in May. EU signs gas agreements with Egypt and Israel to reduce dependency on Russian fuel. We've looked at this, but again, this is really winding up Russia because, as we've already said, they see Israel as taking their cash out of their pockets by giving gas money back to Europe, back to the EU, which is the very money that Putin thinks should be his. Russia demands Israel unconditionally stop unacceptable airstrikes in Syria. Russia problems. Israel needs a direct line of contact to Putin. That was an editorial in the Jerusalem Post. Moscow takes aim at agency that helps Jews to flee. And that's what we looked at in that video at the start of this little section. Russia's Iranian drones complicate Israel's balancing act. That was in the Associated Press in October. Russia said to threaten retaliation if Israel supplies defense aid to Ukraine. Just on that point, of course, we've got a new prime minister in Israel right now, Benjamin Netanyahu is back in power. He's actually said, interestingly, that he might well start supporting Ukraine with some military assistance. The previous government didn't want to. We wait to see what he does. If he does, that will take the Russian and Israel relationship down several grades if that does occur. Syrian airbase hit by alleged Israeli airstrike used by Russian military, not Russian military. So again, we're seeing Israel still attacking bases in Syria, but this time it's very, very, very close to Russian facilities. And again, there could, in the Syrian war, the initial inner ring war that we spoke about, quite easily there could be some Russian casualty in amongst all of that when that happens. Number 8, the Ukraine war has torn apart the Iranian nuclear deal. It hasn't officially been announced that it's completely collapsed, but it's as good as collapsed. And in fact, it was the Ukraine war that caused it to be torn apart. You might wonder where this is mentioned in the Bible about an Iranian deal that comes to an end. Well, it is there. It's in Isaiah chapter 21. We read that the burden of the desert of the sea, as whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it comes from the desert, from a terrible land. A grievous vision is declared unto me. That's Isaiah. Now look at this. The treacherous dealer deals treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. So there is a treacherous deal that is done. And notice the spoiler spoileth, and that's clearly a reference to the ultimate spoiler, which is Russia coming down to take a spoil. But this isn't a deal that is done with Russia, because when you look at it, it says, "Go up, O Elam, besiege, O Media." So the only places that we're told of that are in relation to a treacherous deal is a place called Elam and a place called Media. And Elam is southwest Iran, and Media is central Iran. So there is a treacherous deal that is done that is something to do with Iran. And it actually says there, of course, that they're going to besiege. And in fact, Iran has said recently that if the deal does completely collapse, that they will consider besieging part of the Persian Gulf, through which 20% of the world's oil supply flows through. So we watch to see that, but let's just have a look at this video.
However, Russian officials overseeing the negotiations are hampering the talks. They claim the West sanctions on Moscow are creating problems with the deal.
So for more on this, let's bring in Henry Rome. He is the Deputy Head of Research and the Director of Global Macro Politics and the Middle East at Eurasia Group. Henry, thank you so much for being with us. So how is the ongoing war in Ukraine impacting these nuclear talks between the U.S., Iran, and whatever part Russia has in these talks?
Well, it's really throwing a last-minute wrench into the negotiations. The negotiators, by all accounts, were within days of locking down the revival of this agreement when the Russians came out over the weekend throwing some new demands on the table, such that if U.S. sanctions on Iran are lifted through the agreement, the Russians want to ensure that they're able to benefit from that as well. And of course, they are under a series of crippling Western sanctions for their invasion of Ukraine. So it's really thrown a lot of uncertainty into the talks and created a lot of questions about the longevity of these negotiations.
You see, they were just hours, really, just a few days until the deal was about to come over the line. And then Russia invaded Ukraine. And what we just heard there is the reason that the deal sort of ground to a halt and essentially collapsed was because part of the deal was to release money back into Iran and to stop the sanctions that Iran is currently under. But Russia said, well, okay, but we want to benefit because we're very good friends with Iran. We want to benefit from the relationship that we have. We want Iran to be able to trade and deal with us. But of course, Russia went under sanctions because of the invasion. So the US and the other parties involved said, well, no, you can't. You're not going to benefit from it. And so Russia said, fine, no deal then. And so that is the Ukraine war directly hit the Iranian nuclear deal. And here we are, look, we tracked it through the World Watch. The Iranian nuclear deal close as US says talks in final stages. That, look, February the 17th, 2022 in the Times, Russia invaded, I think it was the 24th of February, 2022, just a few days later. And here we are, look, again on the World Watch slide, the Iranian nuclear talks clouded by Russian demands. That's what I was just talking about. That was in March last year. Iran threatens to strike Israel over slightest move. So now we see Iran being stirred up, becoming even more aggressive, especially towards Israel, because if there isn't a deal, then it's almost got nothing to lose. Iran to remove 27 cameras from its nuclear facilities, and it's now done that. So we're not monitoring, and when I say we, the world is not monitoring the nuclear sites in the same way as before. This is the deception that is now underway. The nuclear deal, it could well lead to some catastrophic situation with Iran. Iran is supporting new terrorist groups in Judea and Samaria, so it's pouring cash into Israel's immediate neighbors. Sunak, Prime Minister of Britain, is increasingly concerned about Iran's behavior as he lists foreign threats to the UK. So this was in the Daily Telegraph at the end of last year. And he basically says that Iran could become one of the UK's biggest foreign policy threats in the coming months. Well, what does he know? Well, he knows that the deal is over. He knows that Iran is rising up. He can see Iran working with Russia, and that also gives Iran a platform to build on because it's got a massive protector of Russia behind the scenes. And clearly, the UK public is being warned that Iran could very soon become a major problem. So we're nearly finished. So looking at number 9, added to fears of famine around the world. How has the Ukraine war caused this fear of famine around the world? Well, Jesus said, first of all, that famine would be one of the things that would be prevalent before he returned. In fact, he says famines and pestilences, and we've seen a pestilence, a plague with COVID, but also he says that we should look out for famine as well.
Even if Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine ended tomorrow, the entire world still would face a rampant hunger crisis. As CNN's Kylie Atwood reports, the U.S. and others are sounding urgent alarms about how Russian forces are interfering with food shipments that keep hundreds of millions of people across the globe from starving.
Grain held hostage because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine is deepening the global food crisis.
When a nation that is the breadbasket of the world becomes a nation with the longest bread lines of the world, we know we have a problem.
Before the Ukraine war began, the country was the world's 4th largest exporter of corn and the 5th largest exporter of wheat. Now those agricultural products cannot get out of Ukraine's ports because of Russia's blockade, leaving dozens of countries desperate. David Beasley, the executive director of the World Food Program, said there are currently at least 323 million people around the world heading towards starvation.
Truly, failure to open those ports in Odessa region will be a declaration of war on global food security, and it will result in famine and destabilization and mass migration around the world.
The Biden administration is ramping up its focus on this deadly crisis as global food prices are spiking. Secretary of State.
So there we are. The food crisis is looming, and 2023 could really see that because we've been using reserves a lot at the moment. But surely the Ukraine war, as it rumbles on, is still going to produce this potential crisis, this famine around the world. Food crisis looms as landmines litter Ukraine farmers' fields. Russian blockade of grain exports fuels famine fears. Plight of Ukraine's wheat farmers threatens a world famine. That was in August. Ukraine's grain crisis, Putin's plundered. I mean, look at this. This is quite amazing because this article in the Times picked up on a number of words here because it talks about Russia's pillage, Russia's looting, Russia's plundered, and Russia's stealing. And all of these are words in connection to Russia and what they're doing with grain. But of course, we know with Bible in hand that Russia is going to pillage, loot, plunder, and steal from Israel and Egypt as well. So we're seeing the exact words being used in relation to Russia, just in a slightly different sense, but it's going to play out, as we know, when Russia invades Israel. Last thing is around increased worldwide military spending, including Germany. This is interesting because Joel 3, prophecy about the final conflict, talks about Gentiles preparing war and beating plowshares into swords and pruning hooks into spears. In fact, outside the United Nations, the opposite is said, that the nations of the world are going to beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, which is again a Bible quote, but that's about when Jesus is back. What's happening now is the opposite, that people are busy pouring money into their military forces.
For decades, Japan has pursued an essentially pacifist stance when it comes to its military. But all that is changing, and quickly. Citing threats from North Korea and China, the military budget is being ratcheted up. $320 billion is being spent over the next 5 years.
Taiwan has proposed a record $19 billion in defense spending for next year as tensions simmer with China. That's a nearly 14% year-on-year.
Vladimir Putin's Russia poses the greatest current threat to NATO. Those are the words of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in a keynote speech delivered a short time ago to Germany's armed forces, the Bundeswehr. Scholz told German military leaders that they should accept that Russia will define itself as an adversary to the European Union, the US and NATO for the foreseeable future. And he said Germany's armed forces must become the best equipped military force in Europe.
This is absolutely amazing because Germany, of course, following the Second World War, would not want to and couldn't really politically pour money into their armed forces. So Germany's armed forces are nowhere near up to the same level as other countries in the EU. But the Ukraine war has changed all of that. And Germany's approved $100 billion to go straight, or euros, I should say, to go into their military, plus a massive uplift in the percentage that they put into this. Germany is going to become a huge fighting force. In fact, many military analysts say they're going to become one of the world's most advanced armies within just a few years with the amount of money that they're pouring in. And of course, at the moment, we've got the US, Britain and Germany all agreeing to send more fighting vehicles, and there is talk about Germany even sending in tanks shortly into the Ukraine war. Germany backs EU proposals for a Russian oil ban. The world's entering a dangerous new age of threat. Sir Stephen Lovegrove has said that there's a raised spectre of a collapse into uncontrolled conflict. That's where the world is at right now. And the world order is on the verge of a cliff, was the first Israeli national intelligence assessment that came out in December the 19th last year. We wouldn't say on the verge of a cliff, we'd probably say on the edge of a cliff. But that's how Israel sees this. And really, we are on the edge of a cliff. We know that all these things in Ukraine are going to lead to all of the prophecies that we have been looking at for many, many years in Ezekiel 38, in Zechariah 12, in Zechariah 14, all the Olivet prophecies. And and so on and so forth. All of these Ukraine has had a huge impact on. So look, what I wanted to do is just finally on a slide say, well, what perhaps is in store for 2023? What perhaps might we see happen? I don't really like doing this, but I just want to put it out there, what we may see coming down the line. First of all, is that Putin, and we've talked about this, Putin may well use extreme force by a massive provocation, perhaps even nuclear, that leads to some stalemate or truce in Ukraine. One thing is certain, Putin is very unlikely to invade Israel while there is a full-blown conflict going on in Ukraine, because there's no country on earth that wants to fight two wars at once. It is logistical nightmare to do that. So almost certainly the Ukraine war at some point comes to a stalemate. And as I say, it could be the dropping of a nuclear bomb or blowing up a dam that floods an entire region and kills many people. Something extreme that brings people to the table might well happen. The other thing is we've got a new hardline government, so-called hardline government in Israel right now, and there's talk about them potentially making peace with Saudi Arabia. We haven't really touched on that, but that is something to look for in 2023. And this new government in Israel, plus events happening between Russia and Iran, plus all of this, the potential peace agreement with Saudi Arabia, and the collapse of the deal could actually lead Iran to activate its proxy armies around Israel and begin the initial inner ring war around Israel. That absolutely could happen sooner than we think. And Ukraine, as we've already said, the events in Ukraine absolutely are something that is leading to this happening. So those are the three things that are, I've put on the screen there. Last slide is this. Look, I mean, the Bible talks in many places about the world being in labor, right, at the time of the end. So just as Jesus is going to return, it's almost like the world is going through labor. And anybody that's witnessed labor, and I did twice with my lovely wife, Angie, and, the contractions start coming. And once they start coming, do they stop and do they send you home? No. Once the contractions are starting, they get stronger and stronger and closer together. So it is highly unlikely that all of this is going to get resolved and the world gets into a wonderful, peaceful scenario, and Christ's return is 50, 100, or, a long time in the future. This is very, very unlikely. We are in labor right now. The world is in labor. And as Jesus said in John chapter 16, a woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So with you. Now is your time of grief, but I will see you again and you will rejoice. And for anybody that's listening to this, we're looking at horror stories, really, aren't we, with everything happening? But all of it is leading to the return, the physical return of Jesus back to this earth. God's kingdom will be established, and all of these events are leading up, racing towards the day that he is to return. Thank you very, very much for listening. And if you'd like to register and receive the Weekly World Watch to keep up to date with events, please go to www.weeklyworldwatch.co.uk and you can register there. Thank you very much for listening.